Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The webinar Hong Kong International Watch Forum will begin in 5 minutes. Please stay tuned. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Hong Kong International Watch Forum, on the occasion of the HKTDC Hong Kong Watch and Clock Fair 2021. This webinar will be conducted in English. You could choose 普通话 as the interpretation language by clicking the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. 此研讨会将以英语进行，您也可选择用普通话收听演讲，只需要按下萤幕最底部的口译选项，就可以挑选语言。If you have any difficulties, please seek assistance from our staff at the chat box. Without further ado, may I first invite Mr. Philip Lau, the Federation of Hong Kong Watch Trades and Industries Limited, to deliver his kickoff remarks. Mr. Lau, please.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at the Hong Kong International Watch Forum 2021. On behalf of the Federations of Hong Kong Watch Trade and Industry, I would like to extend my warm welcome to you. It's my pleasure to have invited representatives from mainland China, France, Germany, Hong Kong, Japan, and Switzerland joining us at the forum today. The forum, again, will be staged in webinar format, enabling all representatives to gather and, more importantly, to share the latest trade statistics and the ideas of future watchmaking industry, despite the travel difficulties now. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused devastations in the global economy, pushed health and social protection systems to the breaking point. The impact of these challenges has put the industry to a critical test. We remain optimistic to post-COVID recovery, and the industry is getting more resilient to the challenges ahead. The forums today will give us a unique platform to generate concrete ideas on the latest regional trade performance of the watch and clock industry in 2021. I'm confident that your discussion here at the forum will help crystallize ideas for ramping up industry players to plot their costs and sell to the right markets. I look forward to your support and your ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lau. May I now invite Ms. Daisy Mok, Hong Kong Watch Manufacturers Association Limited, to deliver her kickoff remarks too. Ms. Mok, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Hong Kong Watch Manufacturers Association, I would like to welcome you all to join us today at the Hong Kong International Watch Forum 2021. Regarding the circumstances the industry is facing during the pandemic, the HKTDC has been exploring new channels over the past year to cope with the needs of manufacturing and buyers facilitating their business exchange. Coming to 2021, we are getting a gradual recovery of the industry. The HKTDC Hong Kong Watch and Clock Fair was staged from 8 to 12 September 2021 in Hong Kong, with online edition from 8 to 19 September. It is the first hybrid fair HKTDC has ever held, enabling our watch peers to explore business opportunity, both online and offline. As the moderator of the forum's second session, we will discuss the emerging trends and solutions that enable the industry to be more agile and resilient. I hope the forum will help spark enthusiasm for the industry. I look forward to your support and your ideas. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mok. This year, we are very honored to have invited key leaders from worldwide esteemed watch and clock associations, and they are Japanese representative, Mr. Hiroyuki Baba, General Manager of Japan Clock and Watch Association, and his successor, Ms. Marie Yamazaki. French representative, Mr. Patrice Bernard, Director General of France Horlogerie. Swiss representative, Mr. Thierry Dubois, Managing Director, Asia Pacific, Federation of the Swiss Watch Industry, FH. German Representative, Dr. Guido Grumman, Managing Director of the Federal Association of Jewellery, Watches, Silverware and Supplying Industry, EV, BVSU. Mainland Chinese Representative, Mr. Zhang Hongguang, Director General of China Horologe Association, 中国钟表协会张宏光理事长. Following the global pandemic in 2020 and general recovery in 2021, numerous challenges have been faced by the watch and clock industry players. To navigate a way out for the industry players, the first session of the forum would focus on the latest regional trade performance of watch industry, while the second session would discuss the upcoming watchmaking trends across different regions. Just a quick note that if you have any questions for the speakers, please feel free to message us in the Q&A box. We will forward them to the speakers after the forum. Without further ado, may I now pass the floor to Mr. Philip Lau, the Federation of Hong Kong Watch Trades and Industries Limited, who will be the moderator for this session.
Thank you so much. Let me do a kickstart by introducing the latest situations of the Hong Kong's timepieces industry in January to July 2021. Hong Kong total exports of watches and clocks have reached 27.8 billion, increased by 45.5% compared with the same period in 2020. The largest markets are mainland China, which is 22.2% of the total exports, Macau, 14.4%, United States, 13.2%, and Switzerland, 11.3%. And together, they account for over 60% of the total exports. In terms of imports, Hong Kong's total imports of watches and clocks have reached 31.4 billion, increased by 59.1% compared with the same period in 2020. The main sources of imports included Switzerland, accounting for 33.4%, mainland China, 19.6%, and Japan, 13.1%. In view of the gradual recovery, our experts here will bring us the market updates and industrial trends of some of the key watch markets. May I first invite each representative to present their respective market updates and industry trends. I would like to first invite Mr. Hiroyuki Baba from Japan Clock and Watch Associations to share with us the watch industry trend performance in Japan. Over to you, Mr. Baba.
So good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Japan Clock and Watch Association, I will explain about market update and industry trend in Japan. The period of this sales information is from January to June. It is 6 months result this year. To start from complete watches. Domestic shipment in quantity. In comparison with the same period last year, the total domestic shipment in units are increased by 6% and amounting to 2.6 million units. An analysis by type. Analog codes are increased by 1%, digital codes are increased by 22%, and mechanical watches are increased by 18%. So next one is a domestic shipment in value. The total domestic shipment in value are increased by 17% and amounting to 37.1 billion yen. An analysis by type. Analog codes are increased by 15%, digital codes are increased by 17%, and mechanical watches are increased by 28%. Next one, this one shows global exports in quantity. In comparison with the same period last year, the total global exports in units are increased by 18% and amounting to 20.5 million units. An analysis by type, analog quotes increased by 16%, digital quotes increased by 17%, and mechanical watches increased by 39%. Then next one, the complete watch global export in value. In comparison with the same period last year, the total global exports in value increased by 24% and amounting to 64.1 billion yen. An analysis by type, analog quotes increased by 17%, digital quotes increased by 22%, and mechanical watches increased by 55%. This is the total shipment in quantity. The total shipment in units increased by 16% and amounting to 23.2 million units. An analysis by type, analog quotes increased by 14%, digital quotes increased by 17%, and mechanical watches increased by 37%. This is the total shipment in value. The total shipment in value increased by 21% and amounting to 101.5 billion yen. An analysis by type, analog quotes increased by 16%, digital quotes increased by 21%, and mechanical watches increased by 45%. This shows the total shipment in quantity by month. The total shipment in the first half this year was much higher than last year. It was about plus 80% in April, May, and June. However, it is still far below compared with the shipment in 2019. Recovery of domestic shipment is slow, and one of the biggest reasons is disappearance of tourists from overseas, particularly from China. Okay, so I'll explain about complete clocks. This is a complete clocks domestic shipment in quantity. In comparison with the same period last year, the total domestic shipment in units increased by 3% and amounting to 2.9 million units. An analysis by type, table clocks increased by 2%, and wall clocks increased by 4%. And this is the domestic shipment in value. The total domestic shipment in value increased by 6% and amounting to 7.2 billion yen. Table clocks increased by 4%, and wall clocks increased by 8%. This is the export in quantity. The total global export in units increased by 15% and amounting to 1.0 million units. Table clocks increased by 27% and wall clocks decreased by 2%. This one is a global export in value. The total global export in value increased by 8% and amounting to 1.3 billion yen. Table clocks increased by 27% and wall clocks decreased by 1%. The total shipment in quantity, in comparison with the same period last year, the total shipment in units increased by 6% and amounting to 3.9 million units. An analysis by type, table clocks increased by 8% and wall clocks increased by 3%. This is the total shipment in value. The total shipment in value increased by 7% and amounting to 8.5 billion yen. An analysis by type, table clocks increased by 7% and wall clocks increased by 7%. So this is the total shipment in quantity by month. damage of clock business was much smaller than watches, although it was still lower than 2019. We can see some moderate recovery from here. Okay, so thank you very much for your kind attention, and this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Baba. Please just stay online and we will talk again soon. May I now invite Mr. Patrice Bernard from France Horlogerie to share French market updates with us. Mr. Bernard, please.
Good morning, everybody. For the French situation, I will explain you that France has suffered of 3 lockdowns during 1 year. The first one was in the beginning of the year 20, second one in November, and the last one until last May. For the foreign trade, when we are regarding the figures of end of June, we can see that there is a recovery of both export and import. This is also important for watch components due to the recovery of some luxury brands. But if we compare the situation the year 21 to 2019, we can see that we have not totally recovered the activity. And this is also the same situation for production. When you can see the French horological manufacturing, we see the year 2020, the evolution was decreasing over 20%. But we can see that for this year, after April, the situation is getting more and more efficient. And for the production, if we compare the 21 to 19, we can see that we are just a little bit up than 2 years ago. So this is a very optimistic point. When we compare also the distribution of watch and jewelry, I'm sorry, I have only a mixed position. The year 20 was bad for retail specialized with less 12%, but online was increasing strongly with more than 31%. And for the first quarter 21 was increasing of more than 41% for online trade. This is due to the lockdown. And for the second quarter, the increase was more than 33% for online, but the specialized retail has increased more than 53%. And the indication I have from retailers in July and August are very close to an increase of sales. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Bernard. Please just stay on the line and we will talk soon. May I now invite Mr. Thierry Dubois from Federation of Swiss Watch Industry FH to share Swiss market updates with us. Mr. Dubois, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us to participate to this forum. And I would like to give a broad overview of the situation as it is today. So the first slide looks at the past 10 years to get an impression of what has been happening, the ups and downs of the industry in terms of value of exports, of Swiss watch exports. And what we can see is that from January, if we look at the right side of the graph, we can see that from January to June 2021, we have a better situation compared to January to June 2020. But we also would like to compare to 2019, which was a good year for us and is a better means of comparison. So if we look at 2019, we can see that we are more or less at the same situation in terms of total exports in value. We have a decrease of minus 0.5%, so it's a very, very small drop to 10.6 billion Swiss francs. What we have noticed is that, of course, one of the big markets, or the biggest market for us, has been China. And China has seen a recovery from the middle of 2020. The other thing that I would like to note is that the US has started to recover from March of this year. And this has influenced this positive situation of today that we see today. When we look at the breakdown in between mechanical and electronic watches, we notice that, of course, mechanical watches constitute the majority of our exports in terms of value. The interesting point that I would like to note or to remark here is that 95% of the value of Swiss watch exports is on wristwatches. And if we look at wristwatches, remember that when we were talking about the total value of exports from Switzerland had a small drop of minus 0.5%. If we focus on wristwatches, we have a small increase of 0.8%, again, versus 2019, which was a good year for us. The volumes, on the other hand, do not follow that trend. The volumes have continued to decrease. And again, if we compare to 2019, we have seen a drop of 30%, 30% compared to 2019. So 2021 versus 2019. The total, we had 7 million products that were exported for 2021, but that represents a drop of 3.1 million compared to 2019. This decline was largely due to steel watches, as well as watches in other materials category. For steel watches, we saw a drop of minus 27%, and for other materials, minus 50%. The value increase was due to watches which are over 3,000 Swiss francs. And the drop was seen on items that are priced at under 500 Swiss francs. If we look at the markets, the regions, and you can see on this slide that Asia represents the vast majority of the world exports of Swiss exports. We have seen, as mentioned earlier, that China recorded a huge increase, plus 61% once again compared to 2019, which was a good year. And overall, Asia has seen a plus 1.5% versus 2019. I would say that maybe one of the positive things that we have seen with the pandemic is that now when we look at regions and we see the performance of regions, we really see the consumers of that regions, as people were not allowed to travel, were not permitted to travel. You really see a true reflection of the markets as such. Europe, compared to 2019, has seen a drop of 8.8%. However, the US has seen an increase of 22%, again, versus 2019. Now, if we look at the markets, and here we're looking at markets in terms of territories in the sense of the World Customs Organization. So China is the leading market today, followed by the US, followed by Hong Kong and Japan, Singapore. So you can see that actually the top 5 position part of the top 5 positions, a good part of it is actually coming from Asia. And if you now consider countries instead of territories, you would say that China, you would then put China and Hong Kong together, and then we would have a total that is not quite, but close to double that of the second market or the second country, which is the US. That's very, very impressive. We are 85% higher. When I say we, China, Hong Kong is 85% ahead of the second market, the US. Let's have a look now at the workforce. And we again have taken several years to enable a broader view. And you see that starting from 1970 up to today, we first saw a drop in the number of companies as well as the employees hired by those companies. But then from 2010, from 1990, we started to see an increase. So gradual increase 1990 to 2010, and then higher, stronger increase 2010 to 2020. So it tends to show that we are back into a more positive mood and more positive situation. This is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dubois. May I now invite Dr. Guido Groman from the Federation Associations of Jewellery, Watches, Silverware and Supplying Industry EV, BVSU, to share German markets updates with us. Dr. Groman, please.
Thank you very much to all the institutions and organizations involved in carrying out this wonderful event for the second time, unfortunately, online. I will give you a short introduction into the German market as of 2020 and 2021. Unfortunately, I cannot show you figures up to June, like, for example, Mr. Bernard did for France, because we only have the figures until March. So I will, in the first half, focus on 2020 and the impact of COVID on our industry here in Germany. And then I will show you an outlook using retail numbers, which are faster statistics of Germany, and show you a bit of how things developed in 2021. In terms of exports of watches, clocks and parts in 2020, we have seen a strong decline of 14.1% from 2019, which resulted in drops exporting to the EFTA region by 31.2%, exports to the European Union region by minus 7.5%, and exports to Asia minus 16.4%. Imports, slightly same situation. Imports in 2020 of watches, clocks and parts declined by 6.2%. Biggest decline in Asia. Imports from Asia minus 8.7%. Imports from EFTA, which also includes Switzerland, minus 6.8%. But imports from the EU, which is a very small part, risen by 28.5%, which is, of course, quite natural, as logistics within the European Union were a bit better, or could be carried out a little bit better than to regions far away. Now for 2021, like I said, the numbers are not up to June, but we have some. We can see that exports already on the rise again, from around 500,000 for the period of time, first 5 months, to 647,000 euro. Imports, same situation, also grew within the first 5 months quite a bit. They are even stronger than 2019, which is a very good sign for us. And if you look at the trade figures, which is very interesting, Looking at 2020 in comparison to 2019, this slide includes jewelry and watches because we always calculate it together. The golden columns are jewelry, the blue columns are watches. In total, we had a decline in trade, in retail, by minus 11.3%. Jewelry, the decline was bigger, minus 10%, was smaller, while in the watch section only the decline in 2020 was minus 15%, again in retail in total in Germany. Mr. Benard said a little bit about the situation in France, which is of course similar in Germany. We used to have 3 lockdowns in retail, hotel, gastronomy, and so on. The year 2020 started extraordinarily good before COVID hit. We had a big rise in the retail market. These percentage numbers that you see on the slides are always in comparison to the month of the previous year. So January 2020 was 10.6% up in comparison to January 2019. And then you see March, where the first COVID wave hit. You see very big decline within March, April, May, as long as the first lockdown was lasting. Then in summer, we had quite a good recovery, August, September, October, up until the point where the second and the third wave hit. And we had a very devastating December, January, and February, December of 2020, and then January, February 2021. And when the third lockdown was over, we saw a very big rise in March, especially April, when also the weather was a little bit better, and also May and June. It's looking very good. I can clearly say comparison to other numbers that were mentioned, that the high-end sector in jewelry, but also watches, is running a lot better than the mid and the low sector, which also adds up to these numbers that I'm showing you, the percentages. And we think it will continue this way for quite a while, as the lower end products were still sold online during the lockdowns, while the high end products within the stores rose again after the lockdown. That's a short perspective from Germany. I'm at the end of my slides. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Groman. Please just stay on the line and we will talk soon. Last but not least, may I now invite Mr. Zhang Hongguang from the China Horologe Association, 中国钟表协会张宏光理事长, to share mainland Chinese markets updates with us. Mr. Zhang, please.
Good afternoon. My pleasure to share with the peers from the industry and gather everybody online, share with you the 2020 first half updates from the market of China. First of all, from January to June, the revenue from Chinese market is slightly up in the first 6 months. Sizable manufacturer is over 400, achieving the revenue of 13.5 billion RMB. Comparatively speaking, the growth is 13.8. 85 companies recorded losses, accounting 30.23% of the total companies. In terms of the shipments, in the first 6 months, the clock production in total is 55.19 million, up by 9.4%. Watch production is 44.7 million pieces, up by 11.1%. The profit timepieces and horological devices in total achieved the profit of 515 million RMB, up by 27.8. Operating profit rate is 3.71, lower than the average growth rate of the service industry of China. Just now I mentioned the sizable manufacturers. The definition of that is the revenue is over 20 million RMB. Look at this chart. From the January of this year to June, let's have the trend. In the first 6 months, the revenue is in the first 2 months, the revenue is 4.1 billion, because we reconcile those numbers together. In March is 3 something billion, in March is 5 billion, and in June is 6.8 billion. Let's have a look on the figures from March onwards. Every month we can achieve 2.2 billion something of the revenue. Second point I want to share with you is the losses, and the losses is getting less and the profit is getting up. From January to June, let's have a look on the profit of each month. From January to February, comparatively speaking, with March, April, and June, the best month is June. The growth rate in that single month comparatively is 25.9%. Based on those figures, I think we have 85 manufacturers out of 263 companies recorded losses. It is comparatively less than last year. The total loss is down 22.68. Timepieces manufacturers in total achieved the profit up by 27.86. The total profit is 518 million, but we are still under the positive scenario of the history. So only compared with 2020, we grew a bit, but it's far below the peak. So let's have a look on the import and export. First, export. From the first 6 months of 2020, export amount of the industry is 1,874 million, up by 31.16%. Watch export amounted to 488 million. Clock and clock movement exporting to 914 million, up by 22.24. Parts of watches and clocks and accessories was exported to the amount of 472 million, up by 22.68. Let's have this chart showing the first 6 months trend. Obviously, the growth trend is gradual and followed 1 month after another. From January to March, accumulatively, the growth rate was 15%, and afterwards, the following 3 months, the growth rate is ranging from 22 to 33%. So the recovery is quite obvious. The second point I want to mention to you is the import situation and the import figures. From this chart, we can find that the import amount from January to March, the growth rate is 97%. This huge growth rate is because of the low base of 2020. So simply you can find out a very huge growth rate in the first 3 months compared with same period of last year. So if you look further for the rest of those months, you still can find the very strong momentum of importing. Another point I want to draw your attention for the importing of watches in China. The total import amount is 2,838 million, up by 92.8. Clock and clocked movement import amount is 2,639 million. Watch and watch movement import amount is 183 million, up by 110%. Parts and accessories import is down 13.32%. Generally, this is the situation of the first half of 2021. Comparatively speaking, we are growing up. The losses is getting less. The profit is getting up. Along with the recovery of the consumption market in mainland China, the production capacity starting from June is getting better. The profitability is growing to the positive direction. I just checked the latest figure from customers in July compared with June. The figures is getting much better. So this is the latest situation of Chinese market in the first 6 months of 2021. Thank you all.
谢谢你，张理事长。Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Thank you for all the informative presentations. We will now move on to session 2 on the topic Share Visions for a Better Global Watchmaking. Ms. Daisy of the Hong Kong Watch Manufacturers Association Limited will be the moderator of the sessions. Over to you, Daisy.
Thanks, Philip. The watch and clock industry has been strongly impacted by the pandemic in 2020. And of course, we are getting a gradual recovery since our mass vaccination begins. Based on the McKinsey report on luxury watches in 2021, there are a few trends particularly worthy of our attention from 2021 to 2025. The first one will be direct to customer D2C trend, with consumer increasing demand of having direct interaction with brands and brands aiming for higher margin. Watchmakers are expected to grow their D2C channel and take control of the customer experience through a dynamic omnichannel approach. This will be a challenge for both brands and the multi-brands retailers. We can also pay our attention to the segment of the pre-owned watches. The pre-owned second-hand watch market is joining the mainstream, and it is set to become the industry's fastest growing segment, reaching US 29 to 32 billion of sales by 2025. Brands such as Porsche has been capitalizing on the shift in response to an increasingly competitive environment. Besides, spurred by the growing popularity of healthcare and wearable technology, smartwatches with healthcare function would continue to the new growth pivot for timepieces. We will now go around the panel again to invite each representative to share their thoughts and vision on the watchmaking trends in their respective regions. I would like to first begin with Ms. Mari Yamasaki, who is the successor of Ms. Barbara as General Manager of Japan Clock and Watch Association, to share with us her vision to a better global watchmaking industry. Over to you, Ms. Yamasaki. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Japan Clock and Watch Association, I'd like to share the current situation of the watch business in Japan. The Japanese economy has been affected by COVID-19 for over a year and moving back and forth. Although there has been a recovery trend in 2021, the infection is currently at its worst due to the spread of the Delta variant and the delays in vaccination. It's too early to predict recovery. Please let us show the situation in terms of consumption trends. The graph above shows the total sales of department stores in Japan from January to June this year. They have been recovering 2021 in comparison with 2020, but show a lower number than 2019. We see that the situation depends on merchandise. Please take a look at the graph below. It shows the sales of jewelries, arts, and watches at department stores. You can see that the recovery is so strong that they are returning closely to the 2019 level. Please let me go to the next page for more details. The main factor of this recovery is the good performance of some limited Swiss luxury watch brands, such as Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Vacheron Constantin, and Richard Mille. On the contrary, the Japanese entry and middle price brands are still suffering, excluding Grand Seiko. As for the low to middle price watches, the sales ratio of e-commerce is actually increasing. Customer behavior changed due to COVID-19, and even after its end, things will not return to the way they were before. The increase of e-commerce is one of the changes. After COVID-19 subsides, we expect to see more and more digital services, such as live commerce and customization. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Yamasaki. Please stay on the line and we will talk to you soon. So, may I now invite Mr. Patrick Bernard from France Horlogerie to share his vision to the French watchmaking industry with us. Mr. Bernard, please.
Thank you. I have no PowerPoint because this is a very open situation for tomorrow world. I can notice that the world is still uncertain for two main reasons. The situation of COVID is not quite stabilized due to the fact that we have some uncertainty on the last future year. Vaccination, and some countries are still closing their borders. And there is also a geopolitical aspect concerning the opening trade with WTO and some competitions between some countries. Remind that 1 year ago we had some difficulties with China and US competition, and the situation is still uncertain. But be optimistic. At each end of lockdown, we have seen that the consumers were still crazy of watches, especially for some luxury, but also for some specific models. And we have some experience in France of kickstarting, which are very successful. Concerning the future of the market, globally, we can see an increase of smartwatches, but I'm still anxious about the fact that we have not really international statistics to evaluate the market in terms of trade exchange. We have also some uncertainty about what is going on with regulation for climate impact. I think about the use of raw materials, leather straps, gems, and so on. The other fact is concerning the distribution model. First of all, we can see that the fairs are still are not going back. We have still some cancellation, and but how can we do the international trade without fairs? And concerning the evolution of retailers and online, it depends on the countries, but we can see that when the people can go to the shops, they are ready to go there, even if online is going upper and upper. And to conclude, I think that we can be optimistic for the watches industry. I remember that some experts have considered that the analog watches, it was the end instead of digital watches. And I can see that analog watches are mainly the watch produced in the world. Regarding other aspect of time keeping measurement, I think we are going to more interest for this, how can I explain it in English, to securate the transfer of time, both in technical appliances and also with smartwatches. And the question of is not more accuracy than to have the good time. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bernard. Please just stay on the line and we will talk to you soon. So may I now invite Mr. Terry Dubas from the Federation of the Swiss Watch Industry, FH, to share his vision to the Swiss watchmaking industry with us. Mr. Dubas, please.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Let me look at the situation, the economic effects of the pandemic that we have just gone through and that we are still living today. So basically what we can see is that the COVID-19 has completely created new consumer habits. It has given consumers more time to discover, to reflect about the purchases that they're going to make in terms of watches. It has also changed consumer habits, and they have placed a lot of importance on value, on history of brands. And the COVID-19, what we can draw as a first conclusion is that the COVID-19 has accelerated and reinforced transformations that were already underway before the pandemic. Let's look at the economic effects that we've just gone through with this COVID-19. Let's go back to 2020 versus 2019. Instead of going to today, we can see that at that time the value of Swiss watch exports has dropped by 21%. This is enormous, and this is comparable to what we had seen after the financial crisis of 2008. So in 2009 we had seen a drop of 22%, very comparable to what we saw in 2020. However, as I mentioned just before, in terms of Swiss watch exports, we have seen a pickup, a gradual pickup from the summer of 2020, summer of last year, and this was due to, thanks to China. The demand for Swiss watches in China has grown since the summer of 2020, and as we saw also previously, from February, March of this year, we have seen a pickup from the demand coming from the US for Swiss watches. So this was a little bit faster, I must say, than what we had expected in Switzerland, and which is very good. But at the same time, if we are going to go back to levels of normality that we have seen in 2019, it will really depend on several different things. The speed rate of vaccination, the consumer confidence has to return fully, of course, resumption of international travels, and the reorganization of distribution, which Mr. Bénard talked of a little bit. So if we look at the consumption and the distribution, which is my next slide, we then can come back to one of the points that was underlined just now by Ms. Yamazaki. Online sales, we have noticed that online sales quickly replaced the shops as those shops had to close during the lockdowns. In 2019, online sales represented 10 to 15% of total sales of luxury products. But this will, however, grow to 30% within the next 5 years. So it will double within the next 5 years, although we must point out that some watch brands have already reached those levels. In parallel to the growing online sales, we have the importance of social media as vectors of communication. Interaction and sales has grown in 2020. And there, we must point out that live streaming has exploded. This is particularly visible here in Asia, where we are very keen to use live streaming. We see that consumers are very comfortable with social media. We can see this in China. We can see this in South Korea. We are starting to see this in Hong Kong. And this point, we know that in Hong Kong, we have had situations where key opinion leaders are used by brands to go into shops of brands, make some purchases in those shops, and soon thereafter you would see the consumers coming in those same shops and asking where those key opinion leaders were sitting, which products have they bought, how did they act, and those members of the public would be buying the exact same products and behaving in the exact same way as those key opinion leaders. Logistics and deliveries are of prime importance as online shoppers expect very quick products once they have placed an order. Now we are talking of hours, days. We are not talking of weeks or months. And shops have become meeting places where events are held. I know that here in Hong Kong, we have seen that for Swiss watch brands, there are quite a lot of events that will take place in retail outlets. And on that point, I must also mention that there's a growing importance for what we call KOS, the key opinion staff. So these are persons that are today working in retail outlets, and that will accompany the consumers on their journey of buying a watch. And this is particularly important, we believe, with Gen Zers. We refer to Gen Zers as those persons, consumers that are born between 1996 and 2012. And we have noticed that they are having a stronger influence together with the millennials. Although the Gen Zers, sorry, I have difficulty pronouncing that, are quite dramatically different from the millennials. And brands have to engage these Gen Zers while at the same time they have to entertain millennials. Let's have a look at the next slides, which is for us very important, for the Swiss watch industry very important, is that it's quite obvious that China is really leading in terms of consumers. We have forecasted that by year 2025, so that is only a few years away, China will represent 46 to 48% of all luxury purchases. It's enormous. Before COVID-19 crisis, 70% of all purchases made by Chinese nationals were made out of China. today they are made in China, and this is a part of the explanation why you see such a huge rise as China becomes the leading market for Swiss watch exports. So at the same time, China's rise came from several different factors: the repatriation of the consumption, as mentioned before, the travel restrictions. We've also noticed that there has been a huge increase in the duty-free market in China, and there is also a desire for the Chinese government to increase the number of cities that would have duty-free areas, duty-free zones. Now, of course, the one that everyone is talking about is located in Hainan, in the island of Hainan, but there is this wish to have more duty-free spots. And there is, of course, a decrease in the price differentiations. Here, I would like to talk about the increase of pre-owned watches. So this is something that was mentioned before, and this is very, very visible for the Swiss watch industry. 2020 reinforced this desire for people to own pre-owned watches. And we can see that this will continue to grow. It is expected that this will increase by another 15 to 20% by 2025. The advantage of the pre-owned market is, of course, that there is an availability for some of the timepieces that are otherwise extremely difficult to have. The big concerns that consumers have towards the pre-owned market is, of course, the certification. How do you make sure that the watch that you are buying, the second-hand watch, the pre-owned watch, is actually genuine? This is a question that is quite prevalent in this part of the world, meaning in Asia, and in China, where you've got a genuine concerns from consumers on the pre-owned market, even though it is an exploding market. Let's go to the next slide. And we can see that basically the COVID-19 has really created an increased desire from the consumers towards transparency, durability, well-being, convenience. This is somehow also matching the desires that the Gen Zers are having. Many expect a stronger engagement from watch brands. This is also coming back to the point that I was mentioning with the KOS, that brands, retailers have to reinforce their key opinion staff to engage more with the clients. Trust has become a very important factor in the relationship between brands and clients. And finally, as Mr. Bénard was mentioning, we also have a concern towards the environment, and it has become a crucial subject for the Swiss watch industry and also for the Gen Zers. This was my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dubas. May I now invite Dr. Guido Groman from the Federal Association of Jewellery, Watches, Silverware and Supplying Industry, EV, BVSU, to share his vision to the German watchmaking industry with us. Dr. Groman, please.
I don't think there is a vision for the German watch industry. It's pretty much the same all over the world, and as you named this part of the forum, Visions for a Global Watch Industry, I would like to start by applauding Mr. Bénard and especially Mr. Dubois for their very interesting, sharp to the point presentations, which basically covered everything or almost everything that I could mention in terms of marketing and sales. We live in very exciting times. We see, as Mr. Dubois mentioned, on the one hand, a strong rise of online sales, which is of course explainable by COVID, but also the movement has been there before. But if I'm just referring to Mr. Dubois' numbers now, if we get to 30% online sales until 2025, then it also means that the majority, 70% of our products will still be sold offline. And you could see that when, especially in Europe, when the lockdown the third lockdown was over, people just flooded the stores. And especially, as I mentioned before, high-end products are really on the rise. Lower priced products were probably sold online during the crisis, but the high-end products, people still want to go into the stores. People still want to have that live experiencing of trying out and then buying a luxury product, which then mixes with certain other trends that were also mentioned before in this forum. We in Germany, we have a study in Germany that declares 7 trends in total in the luxury business, not only reduced to jewelry and watches, but especially for jewelry and watches. And most of them were already mentioned here. Second lifetime models, for example, like as we say in the watch industry, certified pre-owned watches is a very big topic in Germany, in Europe overall. Luxury still highly is looking for tourism to come back. I just came back from a travel through some destinies in Europe, and it was highly interesting because it's the summertime. We have summer vacation now all over the place in Europe. And if you go to the cities that are really important for watch sales in Germany, in Europe, in terms of tourism, it's quite interesting. The cities are not empty. You see some European tourists, you see some Asian tourists, but those are the much smaller part. And you see loads, really a lot of people from the Middle East who seem far more reluctant, or it's more possible for them to travel. And they are already there. And I think they add up to the numbers in Europe that the retail stores experience, which is a very sharp rise in sales numbers, which is of course parts tourism, but most of the tourism is still missing, and it will come back once we get over this crisis. We also have the trend of individualization and customization coming back a little. I think it was stronger in maybe 10 years ago, but it's coming back a little. People sit at home, people think about things they want to buy. Maybe think more about things they want to buy, which brings customization and co-creation of the customer into place. And of course, we have the big topics that were already mentioned in CSR, corporate social responsibility, and also health awareness of the customer, which leads into certain changes in how products are made, but also how products are marketed. Which brings me to my last point, which I think hasn't been mentioned so far, because we are looking not only at the customer but also at the watch industry at the moment, and I think that's not a good movement. We are looking into a phase where the supply chain comes into focus, because still, even after all those months, even after politics had enough time to react on the COVID crisis globally, we still have huge problems within the supply chain, getting products, not only finished products, but especially parts from one place to the other in the world, which leads to a clear trend in Europe for watch and clock and jewelry manufacturers, but also for all other industries, to switch strategies from global sourcing and bring in an element of local sourcing that was supposed to be gone because supply chains weren't so much of a big factor anymore. Now they are, and industry is looking into possibilities to get a secure supply chain by reinventing local suppliers from Europe, which you can see a positive side and a negative side of it. I think it would be much better if the world governments would focus on how to reenact the fast and solid supply chain that we used to have before COVID. We are on the way towards there, but it's taking way too long for many industries, and it's also taking way too long for our industry. And from an industry perspective, I think that is the thing that we have to discuss on a global level in such a forum and in other places, because we have to talk together to politics all over the world in order to help us reenact what we used to have before COVID. It's difficult, but it can be solved. And that was my last statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gorman. Please just stay on the line and we'll talk to you soon. Last but not least, may I now invite Mr. Zhang Hongguang from the China Horologe Association, 中国钟表协会张宏光理事长, to share his vision to the mainland Chinese watchmaking industry with us. Mr. Zhang, please.
Good afternoon. Globally speaking, I'd like to share my outlook. There are two taken-home points I want to make. First, China high-end clock and watch consumption remains robust. In 2021, because of COVID-19, Chinese watch industry had been hit and had recovered from the pandemic. The demand remains robust. The space of the market is huge. High quality, high-end consumption power is growing steadily. International consumption power returns to China mainland, and the China high-end mechanical watchmaking product is getting better month by month. Looking at the recent July, the growing rate is really encouraging and growing. The second point I want to make is smartwatches demand increases, the growing power increases the high-end watch very much. Even the Apple Watch takes 55% of the global smartwatch market, and the shipment is appearing on. It does not pose any challenges to the growing of high-end mechanical watches. In the past 6 years, smartwatches have been developing, but a competitive landscape is turning to be obvious. Smartwatches established market that have been belonged to low-end and mid-end electronic watches, as well as expanded the consumer bases. And it does not affect the very sizable information to the high-end mechanical watches. But there was no obvious influence on high-end mechanical watches, so those are our two observations and point of view that I want to share with you. Thank you very much.
谢谢张理事长. Thank you, Mr. Chang. Thank you for all once again for the market insights. Now, let's move on the panel discussion. So, Philip, do you have any question to our guests for our industry?
Thank you, Daisy. Yes, I thank you for all your very detailed informations and statistics today. And I have some questions regarding Dr. Groman has mentioned just now about supply chain issues. I think it's very interesting issues that we are facing now for Hong Kong watch manufacturer and exporter. May I know, is there any difficulties in sourcing right now for your country for materials or for components for watches? Or is there any way that the technology could play a part in helping in the sourcings, like we have the online sourcings? Will anyone who will try that, and any experience sharing regarding sourcings and supply chain issue?
May I answer?
Yes, please, sir.
The issue that we see at the moment is clearly not within sourcing, people are still in contact with each other. People discuss, and sometimes people even can travel to make that final discussion about a deal. So the sourcing part is not the problem that I see. Of course, we all would like to get back to having our normal life back with trade fairs and everything, but that's not the issue that I wanted to mention. The issue is logistics. We still have, and I also know it from colleagues all over Europe, we still have the situation, and it's in parts it's getting worse and worse as the COVID crisis continues, that we cannot get the parts that we ordered, or we cannot get the parts that we need in order to build the components that we want to build. You see that in all industries. It's a big discussion on TV and on the radio for the big industries, in Germany especially the car industry, which is missing microchips to finish the cars. But in small, it's also a very big problem to the watch industry, because the shipments are coming in 6, 8, 10 to 12 weeks late, which of course then has an impact on selling, especially if it's products that are somehow attached to some event, let's say. Many watches are because of some event throughout the world. Let's mention Olympics, or let's mention big movies, whatever. And so the world is used to having parts just in time, so that they can produce for that certain point of time where the product is supposed to get out. Now, if everything is delayed by 10, 12 weeks because the shipments are coming in, that it also has a deep impact on the sales figures, because sometimes a product is on the rise for just a certain amount of time. And that's the biggest problem I see. The problem is not, again, mentioning the sourcing part for now.
Thank you so much. Dr. Roman, we understand that the problem now is on the supply chain, which you have mentioned that there is a delay in the materials, and in the end there will be a delay in productions. Do you think that is issues for the pre-owned watches getting popular nowadays? What do you think?
I think it could play a small part of the issue. Of course, the customer. Well, let's start another way. The watch industry has heavily relied on the marketing concept of limiting products in certain numbers of ways, which was always a very good way to make products interesting and to sell products. This works only in parts anymore. People, especially when they are bored within a crisis and they're sitting at home in lockdown, think about purchasing things, and then they do not want to wait 8 or 10 months for a product to arrive, or even longer, be on a waiting list at a retail store. They look somewhere else, and they look for ways to buy the product that they want in a different place, which brings pre-owned watches into place. Or they tend to go to another product, which doesn't necessarily need to be the same product. So in terms of watches, it doesn't need to be a watch. Maybe they are looking for something else if they don't get what they want in the certain amount of time that they have or they want to spend to get that product. So that's a big change that has to be tackled within marketing. But I think that the biggest point for pre-owned watches is not the logistics point, but it's the movement towards social responsibility, not only corporate social responsibility that we like to talk about, but the customer is making his or her own thoughts as well. And we see quite a significant rise in interest how products are made, which brings CSR for us into focus. They want to know where the gold comes from. They want to know what kind of labor was used in production and so on. And it also brings into place that certain people are thinking about ways to consume without always consuming a totally new product. For example, in our jewelry and watch industry in Germany, recycled gold is a huge topic, and brands are advertising that. At least for Germany, over 90% of the jewelry and watch production in precious metals comes from recycled metals and not from newly refined metals. And that also, of course, has an impact on interest of the end customer in products that are not necessarily newly made, but maybe have a second or third lifetime option.
Thank you. Talking about pre-owned watches, I would like to ask Mr. Terry about, do you think that the pre-owned watches would help to retain the brand loyalties?
We have seen, thank you very much, Philip, for your question. We have seen that, again, coming back to the difference in the generations, we're looking at the millennials, we're looking at the Generation Z, the newest, youngest generation of consumers. We have found out that the Generation Z tends to be more loyal than the millennials. But at the same time, the Generation Z will be looking at the experience, whereas the millennial will be more career-driven, and as such, they would like to have a watch that will acknowledge that achievement in career. The Generation Z looks more at the experience. So if we take that into consideration with the second-hand market or the pre-owned market, I would say that there's several different things that come into play. You have to look at the geographical also location of the buyer. If the buyer is located in Asia, the buyer will be a little bit more reluctant to go into the pre-owned because of the risk I was mentioning before of possibilities of not having the proper certification from the brand. Also, coming back to geographical locations of the buyers, in Asia, buyers do not mind to wait. They are used to this. When they buy, for instance, an expensive car, they will not mind to wait. And coming back to Dr. Groman's comments on the difficulties with the sourcing and the deliveries of products, we have seen that, for example, in other industries like the car industry. If today you buy a car, you cannot expect to receive it before April of next year. The same will apply to some of the watches. And when you buy a watch, again, the consumers will not mind too much to wait. But again, that will differentiate, and this will come different from market to market. So it's a little bit difficult to give a general answer. We have seen that pre-owned watches have increased, have gotten more popularity, and it will probably continue to be such. But at the same time, there will be this constant worry of the certification and how genuine are the products, at least in this part of the world, in Asia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Terry. I have another questions about the. As you know, Christmas shopping seasons will begin in 2 more months in Europe and Western Hemisphere. Do you guys think that the performance, what do you think about the coming performance for this year Christmas sales seasons in your regions? So maybe we can share a little bit the coming sales seasons in Europe.
How about Mr. Bernard? Can you share with us first for your seasons in France
for the
Christmas
predictions?
season? Thank you.
Yes, if we compare with last year, December was a record month for many French brands. But we didn't have tourists coming to France at this period. So if we can solve the question of vaccination and COVID, I think we could expect a good end of year. But I have not crystal glass, so I just do some optimistic prevision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And
Mr. Zhang, good morning, good afternoon. My question to you is on your outlook on the market performance in the second half and the next year. What's your idea? What do you think of the revenue and the sales volume? Is that going to grow?
I am delighted to be presenting here and have your insight and ideas on the future. You've made some points on the future on the watch industry at various regions. For me, Chinese market is still undergoing recovery. We are still below the performances of 2019, if we assume 2019 was a normal level of the market. The mainland market of China is undergoing tremendous changes in terms of the sales model and business model. Some new models, new channels are undergoing. I'm quite confident the future, because of the size of Chinese market, is marvelous. The consumption power is remaining high. This year, China issues the new initiative named the New Constructions and New Mechanical Engineering Development. So I think those are the positive factors for the industry. Thank you very much, Mr. Chang.
thank you so much for everyone. Is there any more questions that
Can I have one question as well?
Yes, please.
I would like to ask Mr. Baba and Ms. Yamasaki about a question regarding Japan market. So, first year, this is the first time have a delay of the Olympic Games. And so thank you, Japan, for giving us a very good game during the COVID-19. We've talked about the sales of the watches of last year regarding we have any sales gain or because of the Olympia fever. So can you share with us more about it? Thank you.
Okay, so anyway, we had an Olympic game, and we are now having a Paralympic at the moment. But, most of Japanese people are not happy with, Olympic game because we are very serious about the COVID-19. However, it was also fun. But when think about the economic situation, Olympic game doesn't give any positive effect to our, business. Then when look at the watch sales in the first half, as I explained, it's much, much better than last year. Sometimes it's over 80% or 75% or 80% up. But when look at when compared with the 2019, it is still far below. So one of the biggest reasons is, disappearance of foreign tourists, particularly from China. So our domestic brands, such as Seiko, Citizen, Casio, they have supported from the Chinese customers. But or from last year, such kind of journal tourists are almost nothing. So it is very difficult to catch up the same level to 2019. But when just look at the Japanese people consumption, even Japanese, it is still difficult to catch up to 2019 level because, we are still suffering from COVID-19 and our mind is not so, positive against the shopping. That's why my feeling is slightly negative, unfortunately.
Thank you so much for all the panel speakers for sharing the valuable insights to us, and hope to meet you in person next year at the Hong Kong International Watch Fair. Thank you so much today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our speakers for delivering us the global watch market insights. An array of events will also be taking place at the HKTDC Hong Kong Watch and Clock Fair in the coming week, including the Asian Watch Conference on September 9th. Besides, a series of events such as fashion parades, lucky draws, and workshops will be conducted throughout the fair. If you are interested to learn more details of the fair, scan the QR code on your screen. Register now on the website to save Hong Kong $20 ticket fee and get a free entry to the fair. Also, you will soon be directed to our online questionnaire. Please take a minute to fill it out and let us know your thoughts and comments to the forum. Once again, on behalf of the Hong Kong Trade Development Council and the forum organizers, the Hong Kong Watch Manufacturers Association Limited, and the Federation of Hong Kong Watch Trades and Industries Limited, I would like to thank you all for joining us at the Hong Kong International Watch Forum. Hope you're enjoying the webinar, and see you soon at the HKTDC Hong Kong Watch and Clock Fair. Have a nice day, and goodbye.